What's up, guys? Welcome back to the garage. We're following up last week's video of talking about why we eat to this week now talking about why it's so hard to goal-orient eat. And what I'm specifically going to talk about is this idea of restrictive dieting and why it's so hard to do that. Because the truth is it shouldn't be hard to goal-orient eat. Nutrition is such a foundational thing in our life. It shouldn't be complicated. So we're going to break it down, and this is going to help you understand your biology a little bit better, your psychology a little bit better, and it's going to help you be able to think about nutrition in terms of a holistic standpoint and not such a restrictive, I have to diet, I have to stay away from certain foods, etc., etc. So let's start with biology, because biology plays a huge role in why restrictive dieting is not good, and also why it's so hard to goal-orient eat. And when we start talking about biology, we have to understand evolution, and that we got to go back to the caveman days. And I want you to think about what life was like for a caveman, and that food was scarce. And the person, the human, who could find food, and particularly high caloric foods, would survive and then be better able to reproduce. So evolution rewarded the person, the human, the individual, the organism that could get their hands on high calorie food. That meant that that human, that organism, had to have a drive for high calorie foods, had to have a taste for high calorie foods. And when I say high calories, I'm talking about sugar and fat. Both of those are high calorically dense foods that were better able to sustain life when food was scarce. So thinking about that, you understand that we are pre-wired genetically to seek out and like foods that are high in calories. So we genetically prefer high fat and high sugar. Okay? So your addiction is not really an addiction. And I say that lightly because the truth is a lot of things can be an addiction, but you're not out of control. You're pre-wired. Okay? So if you struggle staying away from high fat foods or high sugar foods, you're not alone. And that's a very common human thing, and that we seek it out because in our evolution it was required of us if it meant we were going to reproduce and spread our genes. So evolution rewarded those seekers that went out and found the high calorie foods. Now, back then, that was essential for survival. And the truth is those foods, because of evolution, do light up your reward centers, right? So you feel good when you eat a piece of chocolate, when you eat a piece of steak even, something that's really high in fat, right? Those foods momentarily, psychologically make you feel good. And that's, again, genetic. The problem, though, is these foods are no longer scarce, right? If anything, they are abundant. I don't know if that's an A or an E, doesn't matter. You get the idea. They're abundant, they're everywhere, and they're accessible. And that was not the case back when we were cavemen and we were foragers and hunters. That kind of food was rare. You had to work to hunt down that bison. And the truth is bison back then were probably a lot leaner than how we fatten up cows today. Same thing with all animal products back in the day. They were probably a lot leaner than how we raise them in farms now. We intentionally fatten them up so they are higher in fat. And then the same thing on the sugar side. Finding high sugar foods back when we were foragers was difficult. And fruits and vegetables looked a lot different than they do now, because now we have the ability to genetically modify foods to make them sweeter, to make them bigger, to make them contain more of whatever it is we're seeking, right? We can manipulate foods in all kinds of ways now. So back in the day, high sugar food was rare. You didn't find that very often. Now it's abundant. We get it everywhere. Our fruits change. And then also actual sugar in itself has been so refined that now it's even more calorically dense and less nutrient dense. So now we really have this conundrum of things are no longer scarce, they're abundant, and we have a natural drive to seek them out. Okay? Think about that. Abundance that we have, and then our own natural drive to seek them out. It is no wonder that 70% of Westerners are overweight. It's the no-brainer, right? We have abundance and we have a drive for those foods. So, and this is not to like bring you down and like say there's no hope for the world. There is, of course, hope. But this is a huge, huge, huge problem that we have to deal with. On top of this, right, biologically, we also have a completely different society now, or social setting. It is hard to get away from these foods. Very difficult. And we as humans are social creatures. We constantly put ourselves in settings or context where we can have access to these things. Going out with friends and going out to eat is a very normal thing in American society and Western society. And it's kind of unique to our culture, but food is often the social setting for people. So as well as our drive and the abundance, we're constantly in a context to have access to it, okay? And then on top of that, the psychology surrounding it, we get in these modes where we restrict. We restrict ourselves. I'm going to write that in red because we don't like a restriction. Right? We restrict ourselves. We say, I'm going to go Whole30. I'm not going to eat any sugar. Or I'm going to turn to veganism and not eat any animal fats. Or whatever. I'm going to go low fat. You get the idea, right? This idea around restriction. And the problem is you are literally fighting biology, right? You are literally fighting the way that you are pre-wired. Not to mention, it is just not realistic. You are going to navigate in this life and you are going to have access to high fat and you're going to have access to high sugar. You're going to have access to high caloric foods. And the truth is because of your innate drive, if it is in front of you, you will eat it. And so what happens is we restrict, then we get put into context and we give in, right? Quote unquote, give in. That leads to a binge because we restricted for so long that now we feel the need to overconsume. So we do, right? Everyone's done it, right? We fall off the tracks. That's the same. We fall off the tracks, we lose willpower, and we just binge. We move from the binge to then feeling shame and guilt. I realize that I'm writing sideways, but it just makes sense to me, so just deal with it. But because we binge, now we feel bad about ourselves. We feel shame and guilt, and we say, I have no willpower, I suck, why can't I do this? This is terrible, I just gained 15 pounds in 2 weeks because I can't control myself. We associate this binging with the idea that we're somehow less than, and so then we do the thing, we go back to restricting. Right? We say, I'm going to harden up this time. I'm not going to break. I'm going to restrict myself again because I can't control. This is how I have to do it. And we repeat this cycle over and over and over again. And what that ends up looking like from a weight standpoint, because our body is so good at adapting, when you restrict, and you restrict calories in particular, your body becomes better at using less calories and living with less calories. It adapts. It becomes more efficient. And so once you no longer restrict and you move to this binge cycle, your body registers that as a surplus, right? Because it learned how to survive on restricted calories, and now you're adding more calories on top of that because you're no longer restricting and you're binging. And so then that surplus is stored. Because back in the day, we had to fast, there was famines, and we had to store fat so we could survive a famine. Of course, nowadays there's no famine, except the modern day famine is restricting. But the problem with that is that our weight will start here, just 185. It says general man. We try to lose weight. So think of it as kind of a swirl, right? We're trying to lose weight this way, 175, 165, right? So on and so forth. So we start moving this way, we restrict, and then all of a sudden we're sitting there, we're sitting pretty, and then we start binging, we move back to 185, maybe we gain even a little more weight, maybe we get up to 190, we're like, whoa, shame and guilt kicks in, we start coming back around, maybe we lose a little more weight this time, get to like 170, same thing happens, and then what happens is you just get bigger and bigger until you eventually get tired of this cycle and you end up at 205 pounds because you were doing this restricting and binging cycle over and over again. And so the psychology of it is also really important because your psychology will fight your biology, and 99% of the time your psychology won't win. So in conclusion, right, we go back to this biopsychosocial model of why it's so hard to goal orient eat. The answer is not restriction, and that's a hard pill for people to swallow. It is not restriction. It has to be habit-based. It has to be awareness of your social settings, awareness of your psychology, what you're feeling inside of yourself, aware of your biology and what you're actually dealing with. And so that's why when I work with people in nutrition, it is habit-based nutrition. I'm not going to ask you to restrict calories or carbs or anything like that because it's not sustainable and it won't last. So hopefully this sheds some light on you guys as to why it's so hard to goal orient eat. I'm going to follow this up in another video, hopefully, and talk about kind of digging in more to this high sugar, high fat, caloric thing that we have to navigate in the world of abundance and surplus. So thanks for tuning in. Look forward to next week's video. Talk to you guys soon.